The morning I woke up to find that screaming notice taped across my front door in bold red ink was the morning everything changed. Big block letters telling me I had 72 hours to remove my dog or face a $500 fine every single day I didn't comply. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration of war. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about lawn codes or bylaws or some neighborly misunderstanding. This was about survival. They were trying to rip away the one thing that kept me steady, my service dog, Ranger, the only living being who had never let me down since I came back from overseas, and they had the audacity to call him a violation. Now, Meadowbrook Pines looked like the kind of community you'd see in a glossy brochure, every house beige or gray with manicured lawns that looked cloned from one another, families waving politely at each other while secretly competing about who had the greener grass. That was why I moved there, or at least why I thought I did. I was looking for peace, a backyard where Ranger could stretch out, mornings without chaos, maybe even a chance to quiet the noise in my head. But instead, I found myself in the middle of a suburban dictatorship run by a homeowners association president named Carol Bishop, a woman who treated the HOA like her personal empire. Carol was the type of person you could spot a mile away. White, Lexus, oversized sunglasses even at dusk. Clipboard tucked under her arm like a sheriff's badge. The first time she cornered me, I was sitting on my porch with Ranger at my feet, and she marched up with that tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Your animal is a disturbance," she said flatly, folding her arms like she'd just handed down a court sentence. I told her calmly, "He's a service dog, federally protected, trained for PTSD response." She looked me up and down and smirked. "I don't see you blind. We'll see about that." That was the first shot, right there, fired with a smile. From then on, it escalated fast. First came the violation letters, then whispers around the block, neighbors avoiding eye contact, a few even peeking through blinds like extras in some low-budget spy movie. Ranger, who had never once barked without reason, was suddenly being painted as a monster ruining Carol's perfect little utopia. And it wasn't just her. It was her whole inner circle. Chuck, the retired cop who still carried himself like he was patrolling Fallujah instead of cul-de-sacs. Linda, the accountant who turned every rule into a math equation that always ended with more fines. And Marcus, the contractor who seemed to owe Carol more favors than he could ever repay. Together, they were her little suburban mafia. At first, I thought maybe it was just personal. Maybe Carol just didn't like me. But when I dug deeper, I found something darker. I pulled up old HOA documents from before she was even in charge. Clear as daylight, there was a clause exempting working animals from any size or breed restriction. But in the shiny new digital version, poof, gone. Just deleted. No vote, no notice, nothing. And guess who had edited that file? Carol. The same Carol waving rules in my face like scripture. That wasn't enforcement, that was sabotage, and suddenly I realized she wasn't just after my dog. She'd done this before. 3 other families had lost their homes over violations that forced them to sell cheap, and every single one of those houses ended up sold through Carol's own real estate office. That wasn't coincidence. That was a racket. I'd be lying if I said I felt strong in that moment. Truth is, for a couple nights, I sat in the dark with Ranger pressed against my legs, wondering if maybe Carol was right, maybe I was the problem, maybe I'd never belong anywhere. That's the kind of poison thought that sneaks in when you're already tired and the weight of everything feels heavier than your own bones. But then I remembered Baghdad, remembered what it felt like when someone targeted you and wouldn't stop until you pushed back harder, and I realized that was what this was. Carol thought I'd be her next victim, but she picked the wrong guy. So I started documenting everything. Cameras on my porch, recordings of every conversation, screenshots of her posts, even logging the times her Lexus circled the block. Slowly, my neighbors began to share their own stories. One had been threatened over a basketball hoop, another fined for a flower bed, another forced to repaint their fence 3 times. Carol had been bleeding this neighborhood dry with intimidation, but now people were ready to talk because they saw me standing up. And when you've got a military background and an IT brain, you know how to connect dots and build a case brick by brick. The showdown came at the next board hearing, a Thursday night in that stuffy little clubhouse that always smelled like carpet, cleaner and stale coffee. Carol sat at the head of the table with her little gavel like she was running the United Nations. Her allies lined up beside her. 30 neighbors sitting on folding chairs waiting to watch me get humiliated. She started off with her shrill voice. Federal law does not supersede community rules. We cannot allow dangerous animals to stay here. My pulse was in my ears, but Ranger sat at my feet calm and steady, living proof of everything she was, lying about. When I tried to hand over the ADA documentation, Chuck cut me off with a snort. Anyone can buy a vest online. Like my dog was just some cheap costume. Right then, Ranger leaned across my boots, pressing down with that deep pressure therapy he was trained to do, silent, instinctive, grounding me in a way no human could. And the whole room saw it. I laid out the evidence, the original covenant, clause, the deletion, the pattern of foreclosures tied to Carol's office. I kept my voice level, steady, while Carol's face twisted tighter with every word. And when I asked to see the vote records for that supposed amendment, the silence stretched longer than a desert summer. There were no records. She had forged it herself. That's when the cracks started showing. She stood up, finger pointing, voice rising, shouting that I was faking my PTSD, that Ranger was just a pet, that I was scamming the neighborhood. Cameras rolled, neighbors shifted uncomfortably, and then Mrs. Green, an elderly widow who always slipped Ranger dog biscuits, stood up slowly and said in her soft voice, "That dog is kind. That man is kind. The problem is the woman who makes trouble. Simple. Devastating. Unforgettable." The board still voted 4-3 to uphold Carol's violations, but something had shifted. Everyone saw her for what she was, and from then on, every move she made dug her hole deeper. She sent more fines, more threats, even showed up at my house with a sheriff's deputy for intimidation theater. But every single time she escalated, I documented it. When she tried to file a false police report about Ranger biting a child that didn't exist, the cops laughed it off. When she hired some shady inspector to dig up violations on my siding, he ended up recording her bribery attempt and filing an ethics complaint. And when she actually tried to send a forged animal control order to have Ranger removed, Mrs. Green caught it and called the police. Attempted theft of a service dog is no joke, and suddenly even her allies started backing away. By the time the next big meeting rolled around, the clubhouse was overflowing. Neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, reporters with cameras, even a couple veterans groups. Carol strutted in with her gavel, hands shaking, trying to pretend she still had control. She opened with the same tired speech, but this time nobody bought it. I walked in with Ranger at my side, folder of evidence under my arm, calm as I'd ever been. Mrs. Green spoke first, calling Ranger a gentleman dog. The Rodriguez family presented a petition with dozens of signatures. A local vet testified about Ranger's impeccable training, and then my attorney laid out the federal complaint, explaining that every single board member could be personally liable for civil rights damages. You could see the blood drain from their faces. That's when Carol snapped. She screamed that I was a fraud, that I'd faked my service record, that Ranger was nothing but a mutt. Her voice cracked, her hands waved wildly, and the cameras caught every second. One by one, her allies peeled off. Chuck apologized publicly. Linda called for a vote of no confidence. Marcus just stared at the floor. And then, like the universe was timing the finale, Officer Jenkins walked in with a restraining order against Carol herself. The sound of those papers hitting the table was louder than thunder. The board voted 6-0 to strip her power, rescind every violation, and reimburse my legal costs. Carol stormed out, ranting about conspiracies, peeling away in her Lexus, as cameras followed. And just like that, months of harassment, fines, and threats evaporated. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. I just stood there with Ranger leaning against me, breathing. The silence in that room was heavier than any celebration. That silence was justice. That silence was victory. And it taught me something I'll never forget. Bullies can bend rules, twist words, and weaponize entire systems. But the truth and the law are heavier than any gavel. If you've got patience, evidence, and the courage to stand your ground, eventually they collapse under the weight of their own lies. Now I'll leave you with this. Do you think HOAs are ever really about protecting neighborhoods? Or are they just about power in the wrong hands? I want to hear what you think. Drop a comment below, share your own stories if you've been through anything like this, and let's talk about whether HOA is community or control.